Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is the Ukraine War news update, first part thereof, and I'm going live. Why am I going live? I'm well behind schedule, not because I was up late doing a breaking news piece last night, but because I had to do a bunch of research this morning. Was halfway through recording my news piece, and my laptop just shut down. So I then started again, recorded the whole thing, 35-minute video, and there was no audio because I didn't. The shutdown messed my audio, and I didn't check it again. I'm like an hour later, of wasting all that time. I'm like, right, I'll just do it live. It's easier. Hopefully, you can hear me. Can you let me know if you can hear me? I also want to know if you can hear the audio to the videos when I play them. So I'm going to move you across to another monitor. We're going to go through what I normally do. This is just my normal news video, but um, done live. So, yeah, excellent. You can hear me. Good stuff. Okay, let's go to where we usually start. And thank you to one of my viewers who has come up with my list of caveats. I haven't turned that into a sheet yet, but that will be popping up at some point. So, right, let's go and remove my ugly mug. There you go. So we'll go to the normal general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply, etc. 570 personnel lost, 9 tanks, 17 APVs. As ever, APVs are armored personnel vehicles. That includes infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles. Okay, 570 is pretty much where we saw it yesterday. I think there are hot points on the front line, particularly Robotna, particularly Velika Novosoko. That's gone a little bit quiet recently. During this period of refit, and then Bakhmut and a few other places, but generally some areas I think are quieter than for example when 1,000 were being lost a day at the height of the Bakhmut offensive from the Russians. Okay, that's not to say that Ukrainians aren't losing considerable troops and equipment too. I'd imagine that Robotna is going to be fairly expensive for them in terms of human life and equipment. But 9 tanks is still a consistently high loss. 17 APVs, again, high. We saw yesterday some footage of a Storm Shadow attack on a building that had a bunch of equipment by it, and there was 13 pieces of equipment lost in that just one hit. So there are large numbers of equipment that can be lost in one fell swoop, but also we are moving from a point where artillery was a god of war to a point where drones are now the god of war. And the amount of footage we're seeing, first person view footage of pieces of equipment being lost, is phenomenal. And I think that's where you're losing a lot of these vehicles as well. 26 artillery systems is huge. I don't know how they can keep sustaining these losses, but they apparently can. I mean, artillery is still a massive issue for the Ukrainians. They're still losing large numbers of troops and equipment to artillery. There's no doubt about that. Andrew Perpetua's live stream last night was pretty interesting in showing where the Russians are really heavily shelling. And so if they lose 26, are they definitely losing all of them? Are some of those damaged but reparable or unscathed? Are they able to replace them fairly easily? So on and so forth. All the questions I keep asking about that. Now, one bit of anecdotal information that Andrew Perpetua gave last night was that I think it was somewhere up in the northeastern sector. He said that there was a Mr. Self-propelled gun that was destroyed. I don't know exactly where. Let's just say here it was like 5 kilometers behind the front line. He's saying, why would the Russians bring their longest? Well, the Pion is their longest range artillery, but there's like second longest range artillery that you would have safely sat back here. Why would it be 5 kilometers from the front line? So there are a few answers to this. Possibly that the barrel has been worn down by lack of maintenance. I think that's really plausible. You have to move them closer to get more accuracy. The range goes and the accuracy goes. So you move them closer. It could be that they're trying to do counter battery fire and need to get closer to the front line for that. Or it could be, any number of reasons, but it just seems like quite bizarre that they would do that, or at least they're quite desperate in so needing to do that. Thank you so much, Sal Vodka, by the way, legend, mate. No, really appreciate that. Thank you. So I think these little bits of anecdotal evidence are they do tell us things, and I think there's a desperation for the Russians to be moving their stuff further forward. It could be that they're using cluster munitions that need to be closer to get greater accuracy. But anyway, that was just a nugget to throw in there. If we go back to the list, We have 8 drones. That won't be from last night, night before. 44 vehicles and fuel tanks. Again, this talks to the huge prevalence of first-person view drones. We are seeing a massive number of civilian and military trucks and vehicles getting taken out on a daily basis. There's just so much footage of FPV drones. They are a problem for the Ukrainians as well, but I think we've got to the stage where Ukraine are starting to press an advantage in drone warfare because you've had $350 million raised by our United 24 and the Army of Drones. So they're getting provided with a huge number of drones of a great variety and trained drone operators. Some of the Russians are sources are saying that the skies are black with drones. And I think it's making a big difference. But you're also getting all the drones provided by Western military aid and the Western or allied nations. Because you've got Australian cardboard drones, you've got German, a whole variety of German drones, all sorts of stuff being given, and a load of indigenously manufactured drones using their own kind of military funding and whatnot. And I think they are now starting to press this advantage home, the Ukrainians. So I think it's all about drones really going forward, and that kind of also talks to where we're going to go to next, which is the drone attacks last night that I did my breaking news piece on into Russia. Okay, 5 pieces of special equipment as well taken out. That would be intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, electronic warfare. Now, again, it's not just that the Ukrainians are causing these issues for the Russians. The Russians are also causing issues for the Ukrainians. It's not just a one-way street. It's just that the figures the Russians give are so wildly inaccurate that I don't bother talking about them. But for example, another sort of anecdote was a building in the middle of Avdiivka here that's that on top of it there was a piece of electronic warfare or something ISR equipment, and from sort of 6 kilometers away to the south, the Russians sent an ATGM all this way and took out the top of the building. And so, yeah, the Russians do have their successes, of course, as well. Right. Before we go to the rest of the hits and losses, I want to just go to the strikes section because actually they're the biggest piece of news that's taking up most of the bandwidth today in the information space concerns the strikes on the Russian territories. Before we go to those, though, I do want to highlight this, and this is something I hadn't heard about until Andrew Perpetua discussed it last night. So Russian strikes on a Ukrainian train supposedly carrying ammunition in the Donetsk region here. So the first worry is that you've got a Russian drone operating with impunity behind the Ukrainian lines, about 50k behind the lines. That's a worry. We've heard about this in terms of the Ukrainians doing this, hitting bases between Crimea and the Dnipro, where the Ukrainian drones are just operating with impunity themselves. So the Russians have been complaining about this. Well, actually, this is the other side of the coin here, and the Russians causing issues for the Ukrainians and spotting for, well, I don't know if they're spotting for. These are ballistic missiles probably being used against the train. This is an ammunition train, and this is a really big loss, I think, for the Ukrainians in terms of hitting the railway itself, the logistics there, but taking out the ammunition on this train, taking out the train. I don't know how many carriages were destroyed in this. I don't know the range of the damage. Let's just go and look where that is on the map. So this is a place called Pokrovsk, which is so just to let you know where we are, this is the Donetsk Eastern Front line coming down to Vuhledar here, and we are looking somewhere, if I can find it, where have you gone? Around this area. Here it is. But here we go. So here we have Pokrovsk. And in fact, if you follow the railway, because they're not going to be unloading ammunition in the middle of Pokrovsk, you follow the railway up along this line, parallel to the yellow road. It then splits off here, goes to the northeast, and then this unloading place there, that's where that train was hit. And if we measure that from the front line, that is a good 50 kilometers away. Oops, no, if we don't measure it, let's get some measuring now. So that's a good 50 Ks plus from the front line. So yeah, the theory is that was Iskander missiles. Obviously, some high value ballistic missiles being used, but to hit a high value train, and that train or this kind of logistics network around here in Pokrovsk would be supplying all of this area. All right, so that may have, as we complain about, if you're pro-Ukrainian, complain about, or if you're pro-Russian, actually, you complain about then the Russian forces not getting supplies to the front line because of the logistics being hit behind the front lines in occupied territories of Ukraine there to the south, then the same is going to apply for the Ukrainians here. Will this have an effect on ammunition and equipment being provided to the Ukrainian front line? So that is a significant hit. Anyway, let's go on now to, and I'll be interested to see if you guys can hear the sound to what I'm going to play on these videos. So just let me know in the live chat as well. I can't really keep an eye on the live chat at the moment because I'm talking and stuff. Obs. Right. So before we get on to the strikes into Russia, Crimea was hit yesterday. This is Olenivka, which is where the S-400 was hit or nearby, as far as I can remember, in the last week. So whether this is clearing up, let me know if you can hear that. Can you hear that? I know it's not a lot of sound going on. It's just the sound of wind on the microphone. But anyway, that is Olenivka getting hit again. So the Ukrainians are hitting Crimea as well as obviously doing their stuff into Russia. They're also hitting Crimea today too. So there is activity taking place as we speak. Okay, reports of explosions near the airport in Pskov in Russia coming in. So now we're going to get on to the attacks from last night. Right, I'm going to show you on my map where these took place. Okay, so we're going north into Russia, and we have Moscow up here. There are 5 regions to the south of Moscow, all recorded drone activity. Now, I don't know whether there were hits in all these regions. There's the Lipetsk region there, the Oryol region here, Tula, Kaluga, and Bryansk. The main places of strikes were Bryansk city itself, Tula as well, and possibly Oryol, but the video might have been recording hits into Bryansk, don't quite know. Really kind. Thank you, Walem, for T-Fund. Do you know what? It's a fund that is consistently drawn upon. Thank you very much. It's really, really kind. So yeah, there are reports of Bryansk being hit, several places, the airport in Bryansk or airbase, and a microelectronics factory that supposedly supplies components for Iskander missiles. Kaluga, don't know, that was just a report of activity, and same with Lipetsk, Tula explosion, and Oryol. Now, the main explosions, or the main target was Sukhov up here. This is some 690 kilometers from the Ukrainian front, from the Ukrainian border. Right. So as soon as this happened, this was an airbase and airport all in one. I think it's both military and civilian. So this was struck, and this has a 22, or at least there is Sentinel satellite imagery evidence of 22 IL-76s, these big cargo planes like the Antonov planes, really big cargo airlifters that were earlier this month that were seen on satellite imagery there, and they were hit, as well as a military base too. So as soon as that happened, the Russians were claiming that these were released from Estonia, and then they claimed they were released from Latvia. So both of these. Now, this is to say that it's unrealistic for the drones to get 700 kilometers through Russian airspace unhindered to hit Sukhov up here. They had to have been released from the Baltics. Other theories that are abounding at the moment are that they had to have been released from within Russia. So pro-Ukrainians are going to say, well, they're not going to be released from the Baltic states. That'd just be kind of political suicide, or just be really controversial. So it is much more likely they're released from within Russia. But if that's the case, then they have to have the logistics to support having people there that are willing to do that, having the number of drones, because there are claims between 20 and 30 drones were used. And yeah, that's just really controversial. So, or they went all the way through Russian airspace. Whatever the theory is, those 3 main theories are a real problem for the Russians, right? That is a real issue. Anyway, let's go and look at some of the claims concerning what was happening. So that was the Olenivka one. I'm going to close these down as I go. So it gives my computer a bit of a rest. Right, reports of explosions near the airport in Sukhov. So lots of footage coming out. Reported a drone attack happening at the airport, air defense and small arms trying to shoot them down. So I don't know if you can hear that. Let me know if you can hear this. But if that is the kind of air defense they're relying on, then they are relying on small arms fire or autocannons in order to try and take out these drones. So I don't know that there are sophisticated air defenses being utilized, which is a worry for the Russians again. It is reported 2 Russian planes, this was early doors, so actually now it's up to 7, are damaged, although we have no visual confirmation. So there are some significant explosions. Hear nothing. Damn. Oh, that's a real annoyance. I don't know how to sort that out. You should be able to hear this. I don't know the tech. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So you can't hear that. Anyway, imagine you can hear really significant explosions and Russian people worrying and being psychologically affected by them. Sound there is fine, according to Paddy Pine. Not with me, but with the videos. So anyway, nonetheless, there are large explosions being heard, and here you can see large fires. So there are fuel depots or fuel tanks that were hit at the Sukhov airport. You can see here, reported that 4 aircraft were damaged. Actually, that's now been increased. Secondary detonations. So there were the theories that there was ammunition on board, so on and so forth. Then the police and military took to the roads, blocked off the airports. And then there was a second wave, possibly as well, involving explosions at the airport. That second wave might have been hitting a military base near to the airport. So that could be what was happening there. Right. Okay. If we go on to other sources, this is the claim that the airbase was packed with 22 airframes being seen from the Sentinel-2 satellite there earlier this month. Thank you so much. Eubanks DVDs, legend. Always a good supporter. All of you supporting there. Thank you so much. Really, really kind. So yeah, 22 airframes. This would be an absolutely prime target, right? To have that many airframes is like, as I always say, like shooting fish in a barrel. Yeah, and the TASS news agency admitted really quickly, actually, that that's the Russian news agency, that 4 aircraft IL-76 were hit. So they admitted that early doors. Actually, the latest I've heard is, according to updated data, the Russian invaders were left without 7 aircraft, says Nexter. 2 IL-76s were completely destroyed, and there's footage of this. 4 more were damaged. Russian media write. Earlier, they wrote about the damage to a Tu-22 missile carrier. This is the largest attack on a Russian territory, which also included attacks on Bryansk, and a microelectronics factory there that makes components for Iskanders. So this is, huge stuff. In fact, I don't think I've got it loaded up, so I'm just going to find it. If you look at some of the footage coming out, it is, yeah, here it is. So you've actually got live footage there of the IL-76s on fire. Wowzers. Thank you so much to John. That's really, 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 I do need to look into that. Like, operating through StreamYard, it's not making a sound. So sorry about that. But thank you, John. That's really, really generous. Thanks to all of you. So this is, 2 IL-76s on fire, which is, evidence that targets were struck, and there's no kind of making stuff up there. You've got visual evidence. So that is that's that. Then what happened was you had the Edelweiss plan was put into place, reportedly been initiated in the Sukhov region of the northwestern Russia tonight. Brings all employees under the Internal Affairs Ministry and local police departments to the defense of the region by federal directive. Apparently, there were busloads of police taken. They were surrounding the airport. They were given arms. So this is really serious. This is called the Edelweiss plan. I'd not heard about that before. There's also the Carpet plan. Carpet plan is, I think, where they just stop the airframes taking off from international airports, so airliners and whatnot. So the Moscow airports were shut down, as you would imagine, with the news of so many drones being in the air. Right. Reportedly, says Georgy Reshvili, in Sukhov, the 2nd GRU Special Forces Brigade has been struck. There are different claims as to what military target was struck there. There are explosions. So this is not just a case of having the airbase hit. So that is significant. And then explosions reported in Bryansk. You can't hear this, unfortunately, but this is a really loud explosion caught on CCTV, and the flashes there: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right. It's about 5 seconds. So you're talking about 5 miles if my lightning strikes as a kid. Rule of thumb is correct. So you've got about there's quite some distance, and it's a massive explosion, which indicates that these were big explosions. That the drones had meaningful explosives on board. Now, the prevailing theory is that these are beaver drones or boba drones that are large, indigenously created Ukrainian drones that look fairly large, that seem to have quite a bit of explosive capacity on board. They have a sound that's very much similar to the Shahid drones in sounding like mopeds. Wow, you guys, thank you so much, Remy Stevens. Really kind. Again, you guys are being very generous. Thank you for that. So, yeah, these were arriving in Bryansk. We have evidence that they had some big arrivals, some big explosions being seen. You probably can't hear that. So that is a woman really having some psychological sort of, really upset about this happening, seeing an explosion in the distance. So you have this dual purpose thing of actual material destruction being caused, and then psychological ramifications of these kind of strikes. Moment of impact in Bryansk. Clearly, a drone can be heard prior to the explosion. This was an interesting bit of audio that you can hear. Obviously, you can't hear it, but what happens is you hear the moped sound of the propeller, and then it goes silent. And then some seconds later, quite a big explosion. So what is happening? It appears is that these Beaver drones, or at least in this case, might go into some kind of dive phase where their engine cuts out. There's silence and then a big explosion. Anyway, so that's Bryansk, and just to remind you, Bryansk was further down from Sukhov, down to here, and that was targeted both a microelectronics factory and possibly an airbase in Bryansk. This is another large explosion that you can hear on CCTV, except you guys can't. But you can imagine it, and you can hear the real high pitched sort of moped sound as well, and then a sizable explosion. That's a microelectrics factory that was hit, and then an explosion reported in Tula as well, which was this place just to the east of or northeast of Bryansk, getting a little bit closer then to Moscow there. And then you have people, Russian mill bloggers, saying such a number of drones. There are about 20 of them. I don't know that you can really count the number of drones that would have hit places like Sukhov, because it's in the dark. They're firing at them with tracer bullets. I don't know how many there are. I think that's a bit of a guess, and they're obviously not detecting them on air defense systems and not using them. Anyway, here's a claim that they're launched from the Baltics. Yes, drones are weird. Explosions are very strong and right on target. So that is the Russians admitting that these are successfully targeted drones. And in fact, so this is big, right? And this goes against what the Russian MOD spokesperson has, or the Russian spokesperson for the government has said this morning. We'll get onto what Maria Zakharova has said. This is the effect such strikes are having on someone who is a prominent Russian mill blogger. The 13th, we dipped into his claims before. So Igor Guzenko says, to tell you the truth, I'm not so sure about some kind of victory anymore. Wow. Here's a Russian ultra-nationalist mill blogger who's on the front lines saying, I don't know that we're going to win this. This is a massive thing, right? While the whole country is dancing to the approving exclamations of the country's leadership, so Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister's daughter, had a big party last night. Do not expect anything good. It will only get worse. They kill my faith in everything good. And at this time, ordinary guys are dying at the front. I can't call it otherwise than genocide. Well, yes, it is. Well, it's not. This isn't genocide, but what you have done in Ukraine is arguably genocide. So get it right there. Massive thanks to Sour Vodka again. Thanks for that. Ukrainians up to the Surovikin line. We'll learn about that a little bit later. I don't know. I might just do a really big long. I was only going to do part one. I might turn this into part 1 and 2 actually, as I've got you here. If you're up for a long one. Anyway, so that is. I think that's really really significant from the 13th there, giving an indication of exactly how people are feeling about this, people who aren't official government spokespeople. And again, thank you so much to Louise Foley, who's also a really great supporter of the channel. Thanks, Louise. Now, there were claims that drones had entered Lipetsk and Kaluga as well, but I don't have any information about those. Right, let's move on then to the biggest Russian attack on Kyiv in month, kills 2 and injures 3. Right. So what happened? And I don't think this was. Thanks again, Louise. I don't think that this was pre-organized. I think Russia then went, "Oh my God, this is really serious. Right, get on the phone to the Black Sea Fleet. We want to launch some cruise missiles. Let's take out Kyiv. This is crazy. We can't let them control the narrative." Except, I think this is a massive waste. Why do I think this is a massive waste? Okay, first of all, what happened? Well, Kyiv was attacked by a whole bunch of missiles, cruise missiles from Russia. And this is one of my viewers says Kyiv just got belted in revenge this morning. I slept through the super loud sirens, but the low frequency rumbles woke me. Big hits. My wife, who lived through the early days of the war, said nothing hit the ground. All air hits. Huge bits of debris went over our heads. Mostly was way away. It's been like a bloody oven here. Hot even for an Aussie. So waking at 5 a.m. In 5 in the morning to a few kabooms and a cool breeze had mixed blessings. Watching the show, that was my breaking news update, just in my grundies in my underwear. So thank you for watching. But that's a really interesting bit of evidence as to what's going on in Kyiv from one of my viewers. So thank you for that. So what happened? Well, early in the hours, the Russians tried to gain revenge with its own massive attack on Kyiv, and Ukraine managed to shoot down 43 of 44 targets, which is absolutely that's a massive interception rate, really good interception rate. Sorry, I'm just getting my partner to shut the door to my boy who's playing on the PlayStation just next door, and he's screaming with joy. But anyway, so they shot down 43 out of 44 targets. So to me, that's a waste. So when I was talking about how the Ukrainians are wasting, the Russians are wasting this kind of revenge, it was just. I don't want to give the Russians any ideas here, but if you're going to shoot 28 air-launched cruise missiles from the Caspian Sea. So actually, it's not the Black Sea Fleet; it's Caspian Sea. But if you're going to send off 28 air-launched cruise missiles, don't send them to Kiev, where they've got the very best air defense systems, because they're all going to get shot down. I reckon that if Russia had actually sent all their cruise missiles that they have done since the beginning of the war, all those hundreds and hundreds of missiles that they sent against civilian targets and infrastructure and energy infrastructure, if they actually targeted military installations and military targets with all those missiles, I reckon this war would be in a very different position. I reckon their use of cruise missiles is one of the worst decisions of the war for the Russians. And here they go again. We want revenge. Right, send 28 cruise missiles against Kiev. Hang on, sir. Isn't that where they've got the best air defense systems? Yeah, we're gonna show them what for. Yeah, but aren't they all gonna get shot down? Yeah, whatever. They all get shot down. You send 28 against, I don't know, Lviv, Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, or whatever. As horrible as that is, from my point of view, they're not going to get shot down in those numbers. 15 out of 16 drones intercepted. So my opinion is that is just a waste. Here, someone else kind of agrees. Ewan McDonald says Russia sent many of its air defense systems to Ukraine and now has too few to protect the motherland. Meanwhile, Ukraine's air defenses are becoming more effective. Ukraine is also striking military targets while Russia continues ineffective terror attacks on civilians. Absolutely. Just what are you doing, Russia? It just makes no sense to me. Meanwhile, the press secretary of the Russian Foreign Ministry, so this is going back to Maria Zakharova, believes that, quote, Ukraine's attempts to attack Russian territories with the help of drones are a dead end. Are they a dead end? You've just lost 7 aircraft in Sukhov, 700 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. That's not a dead end. You've got the 13th, an ultra-nationalist, saying, I don't think we're going to win this war anymore as a result of those strikes. It's not a dead end. Stop trying to dress this up. Or dress this down, I guess. And also, quote, this is the agony of the Kyiv regime. Stupid hatred. Have you not seen what you've been doing for a year and a half? These are targeted attacks. You've been doing genocidal, stupid hatred attacks. on civilian infrastructure. You just sent 28 cruise missiles at Kyiv, not a bunch of drones specifically targeting military airlifters and a military base. You've just sent 28 cruise missiles and 16 Shaheeds at a capital city. You don't get to say this and not have someone call you out on that. So I'm calling you out. So you claim it's stupid hatred, anger, and the absence of any prospects of its own development. Just do one. Now, I know some of you guys say, don't worry, don't concentrate on trolls. It's a waste of your time. I didn't see it as a waste of my time. I love it personally. So I get off on stuff like this. But a solid faux life who watches my stuff has already said to my breaking news. I mean, this guy claims he's a black American, and I've called him out on this. And whenever I do, he then starts using really stereotypical slang language that's of that demographic. And you're like, hey, you weren't using that before. Now I've called you out for not being a black American. You're using this. And you happen to post, as other people have noticed, only posts in the middle of American night because it's Russian morning, disappeared when the St. Petersburg troll factory got shut down until they all started trickling back. It's like, you are a Russian troll. Just get over it. Anyway, why I'm pointing this out is because this is exactly what Maria Zakharova's just said, broadly, just in troll speak. So really, dude, that was not very impressive. Yes, it was. Won't change anything. We've already got people saying we're not going to win the war. It will only make Russian soldiers fight even harder. No, you've got someone saying they're dying on the front line for nothing. Boring, dude. Yeah, I think methinks the lady does protest too much. So anyway, that's a bit of a troll response, but I think that's in line with that. I think you're going to start seeing trolls just as ever toe the party line with what the Russian MOD is declaring they should say. It's like you are, and the other thing is, if this guy really was American, why is he going? That's not very impressive. Well, what's it to you whether like a drone strike on Russia was not impressive or not? Why are you defensive about the Russian position here? To me, like words speak everything to me. So this is the speech of a Russian employee saying stuff as if they were a Russian. This is not saying someone as if they're American. Well, that's not very impressive. Won't change anything. Will only make the Russian soldiers fight even harder. What's it to you? If you're not that interested, if you're an American, why are you posting that at 5 in the morning? Or 4 in the morning or whatever. Anyway, it's because you're a Russian. So what else has been happening? Well, strikes on Crimea are taking place today as we speak. 2 strong explosions are reported in Zhankoy and also in Krasnoperekropsk. Why this is really important is because these are the 2 logistics routes out of and into Crimea to supply the southern occupied districts. Now, this Zhankoy is a rail hub as well as feeding the Chonhar Bridge route. Up here, Krasnoperekropsk is the only really sound route now that the Chonhar bridges have been taken out and the Henichets bridge has also been taken out that feeds the Arabat Spit. You've now got only the ability to go through Armyansk. Well, if you're going to start hitting logistics there, which I predicted is going to happen, I don't know whether it's logistics here or a base or some radar system or whatever, but I think it's significant that both of those hits are logistics routes into occupied region of Ukraine. So there you go. Thank you so much for all your live chats, by the way. I know you're still going there. I'm struggling to keep up with you. Thank you to whoever has supplied memberships. That's really, really kind of you to supply memberships for people. Daniel Smith as well. Thank you very much. Says psychological change in Russia is difficult but vital. In my humble opinion, support for Navalny's foundation is almost as vital as supporting Ukraine. It's really interesting. I think it's worth latching on to. Navalny might not be a perfect leader. He's said controversial things about, for example, the occupied territories before, about Crimea. But actually, I think he's changed his tune a little bit and is siding with the anti-war position quite strongly. The problem is he's still in prison and he's now in prison for even longer. But his work is vital. The stuff that his group do and have done, if it wasn't for his project of getting drones up around the Golden Palace around the Black Sea, we wouldn't know that Putin, well, we wouldn't really know that he was indeed the richest man in the world and that he does have ridiculous wealth in terms of this Golden Palace that's secretively been built. Well, actually, that was outed by Navalny and the work that he was doing. So, yeah, it really important there. And Villa or Ville, I'm not sure, keep up the good work. Cheers from Finland. So it's probably Villa. Thank you, Finland. Oh, not just the whole country, but thank you, Villa. Really appreciate that. And Julian Rossiter, who is also a big supporter of the channel. Thank you so much. Part 1 and 2 live. Hope you've had your Ready Brek. Nice British reference there to a good old Ready Brek cereal that we have, a bit like porridge. So thank you. And Lawrence says, if anyone wishes to become a member of Jonathan's Inner Circle, sign up. It costs less than a beer a month. Thank you, Lawrence. Lawrence is such an amazing supporter. Anyway, back to where I was. Just I have to give you thanks, guys, because it allows me to do this. Literally, like I wouldn't be able to do what I do without that support. So thank you. The more explosions in Russia, the better, says Thomas Steiner. Russia will have to think twice about striking Ukraine's energy infrastructure if Ukraine can strike back and plunge Russia into darkness too. Now, a lot of people have been talking about this. This is really significant because this acts, as he says, as a deterrent. Can Ukraine do to Russia what Russia have done to Ukraine? Can they hit energy infrastructure? Because Russia were hitting Ukrainian infrastructure earlier on in war in the knowledge that, hey, we can hit Ukraine's energy infrastructure because they will never be able to hit ours, right? So we can happily do that. But if it's now got to a point where Ukraine have the capability to hit Russian energy infrastructure, then that stops Russia being able to, or possibly stops Russia in their tracks by going, okay, if we do that to Ukraine and they can do it back to us, our decision to attack Ukraine's energy infrastructure will mean that our own population will be plunged into darkness. And actually, that would then have a political ramification that could mean that people really don't want this war to continue. So I think that's a really salient point from Thomas Steiner there. As Dead District says, well, actually saying what George Rushvili says, reportedly six strategic airlifters have been shot down or blown up, or damaged, and one Tu-22 strategic bomber has been destroyed or damaged at the Sukhov air base. Refueling facilities been destroyed, and a Cherika military base where the 104th Guards Air Assault Regiment is located has been attacked too. So everything's going according to plan in this 3-day war, right? Putin, is that right? Is that right? Am I right? Phillips O'Brien says, of this, Ukraine attempted a complex drone attack across 6 regions in Russia last night. Attacks reported in Sukhov, Moscow, Ryazan, Kaluga, Bryansk, and Orlov. This seems to be well-coordinated, complex operation to hit a wide range of targets. Here's a map of how scattered they are. It's a slightly different, like Tula not mentioned there. This would have required excellent intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, a well-built-up stockpile of drones, coordinated launches, and the like. It's not clear how much damage was done, but the Sukhov attack does seem to have resulted in something significant. It's an interesting example of how the war continues to trend in Ukraine's favor and how the Ukrainians are showing an ability to manufacture weapons of war and adapt to the conditions of this war. Expect much more of this going forward. Yeah, people have been calling out for this recently, and actually, I think last night's activities are massively significant and will have a huge impact on this war in general. Okay, that's a lot of me talking just about those strikes. Let's get back to a few other bits and pieces. So here, the strikes and losses here. Here we have the rail bridges near the Belarus-Ukrainian border of Slovechno have been blown up. Not entirely certain but it's assumed that the TM62 anti-tank mines attached to the bridge were ignited by lighting them. No casualties reported. Right, where is this? Let's go to my map. This is on the border of Belarus and Ukraine, very much in the northwest. And I presume that's something that will stop the Belarusians being able to cross into all the Russians into Ukraine. That's just a bit of forward thinking. Some bridges being blown up there. So yeah, let's move on. Now, a Russian Ka-52 attack helicopters targeted 2 armored vehicles of the Ukrainian army with the Vikhor-1 ATGM missiles in the Zaporizhzhia front line. This is significant because it shows that the Ka-52 attack helicopters are still operational. They are still causing the Ukrainians a big problem. Air defense is a real necessity. It would be great if you could have some really decent medium range air defense systems you could set back from the front line, not just your little Strelas and whatnot, and your short range stuff that had to be brought much closer with a much shorter range. But if you could get a good medium range set of air defense systems set back here, so they are less able to be taken out by drones and whatnot, and have the range to be able to cover this whole front line. That to me would be one of the main um, objectives for the Ukrainians. But of course, you start bringing those things closer to the front line, they will be more susceptible, won't they? This is something that's come out recently in Forbes. In the 13 weeks of the counteroffensive, Ukraine has lost just 5 of its Leopard 2 tanks uh, of the 71 that it has. Now, this is it's not to say that some haven't been damaged. 10 apparently have been damaged and are being repaired. But the idea is that they can be brought back to the front line. If you've only lost 5, then actually that's not too bad. And it talks about in the article that perhaps the crew of all 5 of those survived as well. We don't know, but there's every chance that with the better armor of the Leopard 2, that the crews are surviving. We've heard that Ukrainians are claiming that the survivability in the Western equipment is massively higher than in some of the older Soviet era equipment. Bradleys, they're surviving. They're able to pull out, get out themselves alive, but also pull out equipment and repair equipment from inside these Bradleys that have been taken out by ATGMs and whatnot and mines. So that is significant there. Just to talk about drones and the significance of the drones and how they've evolved to be so incredibly useful is a really good thread by Trent Zelenko that I'll dip into in the whole of this thread. I'll dip into at a later point, but I just want to pick this part out where he says Alexander has killed 20 Russian fighting vehicles as of the 7th of August 2023, the date of publication, in Zaporizhia. So this one chap with drones has destroyed 5 tanks, 5 combat infantry vehicles, 5 armored personnel carriers, 1 combat reconnaissance vehicle, 2 multi-purpose lightly armed transporters, an infantry fighting vehicle, and an airborne combat vehicle. So this one guy has destroyed between 20 and 40 million dollars worth of Russian combat vehicles for the cost of $12,000 worth of drones. Wow. Okay, he might have other drones that hadn't succeeded and could be thrown into that, but that is incredible. That's less than the cost of 4 L-15 155 mil shells. That is how significant drones are. So when we go to talking about the losses on the front line, and are these realistic? Well, we've got one guy that has taken out 20 on his own. Just insane numbers, and it just shows the effectiveness of those drones. Now, Russia has lost a rare 9S-36M radar unit, the Buk 3 M3 air defense system, by a HIMARS strike. But again, you've got drones spotting that. Not that you would, well, I guess you would spot because you need it in kind of real time. So the drone will spot for real time for the HIMARS and then relay the coordinates when it sort of parks up, and then that gets hit by HIMARS. Unit has a price of around $40 million, as not many of these have been manufactured since coming online in 2015. It's a really high value piece of equipment. It's not to say the Ukrainians aren't losing high value pieces of equipment too, and they are. This Russian military Mi-8 helicopter crashed in Chelyabinsk region in Russia. It belonged to the FSB and was on a training mission when likely the engine failed. All 3 crew members perished in the crash. This is a really big problem for the Russians. They are losing fixed wing aircraft in training missions. They're flying into buildings in, where was it? Was it Rostov on Don or somewhere down that neck of the woods? Several times that's happened actually, and just being lost out in the middle of nowhere too. And a whole bunch of helicopters. They've lost, I reckon, 5 helicopters in the last few months just crashing. Now, if that happened in the UK, we'd be having a Commons Select Committee investigation into that. The amount of aircraft that the Russians are losing accidentally on a monthly basis is frighteningly large. And here's another example. Yeah, not good. Anyway, on to Russia on fire. This is a fire yesterday outside the center of Moscow near the 3 Station Square. Warehouses said to be burning and dense smoke is visible for miles. Again, we got this issue of significant fires and often taking place in the center of Moscow too. This is really significant. Again, each one of these fires would be huge news for months in the UK, and this is happening on a daily basis. Another fire here. Now, this isn't so much to do with the war. This is a wildfire, but I probably haven't spoken to you about this for some time, so I'll remind you. This is a scene at the popular resort town of Gelachnik. Forest fire is perilously close to local hotels. Actually, it's now covered 50,000 square meters, and the Russians couldn't get it under control. It's involving 195 firefighters, 45 units of equipment. and the fire is winning, and helicopters as well. Now, why this is significant and to do with the war, traditionally the Russians use their conscripts to become firefighters. So you have your national conscription, and every year you get your waves of people coming in to do their national service, and they get trained. Except they don't really get trained for warfare because it's peacetime and etc. etc. Except not now. But traditionally, the Russian government would use these as your, well, we're not going to employ permanently. Um, Firefighters and emergency services and so on and so forth. So we might as well use conscripts to do this for free, right? And it's just a way of having government employees and kill two birds with one stone. So in the wildfire season, they'd have your army doing the job of sorting all of these fires out. But last year, you had an uptick in these fires and pretty terrible wildfires because the Russian conscripts were concerned with the war, being sent to war, etc., etc. Although there's all this grey area about whether conscripts can be sent to the front line or not. But nonetheless, like they weren't able to do this activity because of the Ukraine war. So the ramifications for the war are multifarious, right? They affect the Russian society and, in this case, environment in many different ways. So wildfires is one way that the war has affected Russian society. But okay, going on to other bits and pieces. But just first, thank you so much to Smiling Muffin with Norwegian Kroner. Thank you for the coffee fund. I do apologise. It is a tea fund. Oh, a cold tea fund. No, thanks so much, Smiling Muffin. Really appreciate that. And memberships as well. Thank you for those who are allowing people like Daniel to become members. That's really cool. Really appreciate all of that. And we have a super chat here, which I will just get through. Thank you so much to all of you good people. Pest Pogrom, again, Norwegian Kroner. We would love a long video. Thank you. If you want more drone strikes in Aucklandia in Russia, support the Ukrainian army and Serhiy Sternenko's drone campaign. Glory to Ukraine. So you guys go and check out Serhiy Sternenko and see what he is doing. Thank you very much, Pest Pogrom. I really appreciate that. Holy cowzaroonies. Hutch, thank you incredibly. I am one of the Republican conservative leaving Americans who love your content and support Ukraine 100%. That's not the UK. Keep up the great work. Hope this helps supply you with some coffee on top of your tea for your super late night breaking news updates. Thank you, Hutch. That's amazing. And I just want to say something to this because I know people interested in the war, particularly Americans interested in the war, are predominantly going to be uh, predominantly going to be well, no, not predominantly. There's going to be like 50-50 conservative, maybe right wing. People who are war hawks and interested in war aren't always kind of your liberal types. I'm a liberal type. And when I do evaluation of geopolitics, right, I am going to annoy half of my audience. And so I always have to be careful on how I couch things, obviously, but I don't want to not say what I believe because then that's a form of censorship, isn't it? And so I really appreciate when I have like conservative Americans, and then some people have a right go back at me. It's like, you don't know what you're talking about. You should never talk about American politics. And I'm like, okay, yeah, well, fair enough. But is it because I'm just saying something you don't like, rather than I just don't know what I'm talking about? And so I really appreciate it when conservative Americans come on and say, look, I'm a conservative American, and I appreciate what you're saying, and actually I take on board what you're saying, or like I don't get all defensive. You know, we can have a adult discussion about this, and I really appreciate that, and that means an awful lot to me. So thank you, Hutch, for supporting the channel, but also for just putting up with stuff that you might not necessarily agree with all the time. But also sometimes when I attack Americans' conservatism, I'm often attacking certain strains of that, which I think are more problematic. It's not conservatism as a whole, but it's like, say, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's like, I'll attack her. I'm not attacking her because of like necessarily what she believes, but because of the double standards she has. And if you're going to say you believe this, but then act like this, and those two things don't work, then I'm going to call you out. And hopefully I'll do that with the left as well. So people like Seymour Hersh, not a big fan of where he's gone recently, and so on and so forth. So I'll call out people for what I think are double standards or problems in their thought processes, whilst also trying to keep a broad church here. So thank you for that. Okay, back to Evil Gherkin. So Igor Strelkov remains in custody. So he's an ultra nationalist, being arrested for extremism, which is kind of weird because he's proposing nothing more than the Russian MOD are. All he's actually doing is criticizing them for not doing it well enough. And he gets in prison. And actually, the court in Moscow has upheld the arrest of the former defense minister of the DPR. So yeah, he's still in trouble there. And here we have another bit and piece, another bit here, another nugget. Russian authorities in Tokmak prepare to leave the city, according to Melitopol's mayor. Now, Tokmak is dangerously close to the front line. It was pretty much anyway. I mean, the distance to the front line was sort of 28 kilometers there, as it was at the beginning of counteroffensive. But right now, I mean, you can see you can sit a Caesar self-propelled howitzer here or a Panzer Howitzer 2000, and you can hit Tokmak. Tokmak is under effectively, fire control to some degree uh, from artillery, and that is a problem for Tokmak. So it doesn't surprise me that you would have Russians deciding to leave Tokmak and move on elsewhere. Right. Okay. I am going to do this all in one. I might as well. I've got you here. So let's do a quick synopsis of the front line. This will be changing, and bear in mind, I haven't looked for the last hour or so about what's going on the front line, and things might have come out. So, according to Hannah Malia, the Russian forces are trapped in Bakhmut. That's a claim, and we've heard this. We heard this a couple of months ago from Hannah Malia, but repeating it now. Coming from her, we are moving along the southern flank. We have reached many commanding heights. The enemy is trapped here. They cannot move out of Bakhmut. So let's go to Bakhmut. There are claims. So if you look at the map, thank you so much to JR who updated my map last night. Let's actually go to the top up here. This is going to be like a bastardization of my normal frontline full-on update, mixing it with my just synopsis. But as you can see here, Suryat maps, the pro-Russian mapper in red, as most of you will know, is signifying some gains to the north here. There are claims though from Andrew Perpetua, which is since JR has done this updating, I think, that the Russians have been pushed back. There's evidence that the Ukrainians are actually in a position somewhere around here. If we looked at Andrew Perpetua's map, that Ukrainians are further forward. So I think, and many people are saying, take the claims of the Russians in this northeastern sector with a pinch of salt. They might not be as far forward as they are claiming. And as is reflected by Suryat maps there. So over-egged possibly there. But moving on down to Bakhmut, as I was saying, we have this claim. So a few things going on. There's been a game for the Ukrainians up in this forest area near Zalizhnyansky. There's footage that has come out of, I showed you part of that footage from about a week ago, maybe 4 or 5 days ago, of using a Miklik to attack. And then there was some really hardcore trench fighting within the forest and people getting shot. And I couldn't show you that footage, but that was then translated into some gains for the Ukrainians in the forest area. Then the other day, and I didn't share this with you, but I probably should have done. The other day, there's some footage that came out from this same bit of forest, and it was the day after a US official said in the mainstream media that drones shouldn't be used as much, as you get more people doing reconnaissance on the ground. And I know some people are saying that was misinterpreted or whatever. But the next day, you had this amazing bit of drone footage that showed a Russian platoon going through the forest and the Ukrainian platoon going through the same forest. And they were like 10 meters away from each other, going in different directions. And if it wasn't for, I presume the drone footage communicated, it was a Ukrainian drone, communicated to the guys on the ground, you've got some guys just like 10 meters away from you. And that allowed the Ukrainians to then turn their guns on the Russians and shoot the Russians. And it was an amazing bit of footage. These guys were just quietly creeping through the forest right next to each other. And it was the drone footage that allowed the Ukrainians to find out about that. Incredible bit of footage. Anyway, Hamalia is saying that the advances to the south, and we can see these are advances accepted by, and this is hugely meaningful now. So this is Suryat maps. Suryat maps has finally admitted that Klishchiivka is not under Russian control. I mean, it's only taken them like 2 weeks to catch up to that. It's not been under Russian control for a long time. You might have Russian presence in the northern areas here, but it's some quite significant changes to the Suryat maps, both in Klishchiivka area and Andriivka, and south of Andriivka. And indeed, it is around here that some sources are saying the Ukrainians are having most success. and they are making advances. Some are saying, Andrew Perpetual last night, that Andriivka is on the edge of being basically taken. I don't know whether they are fighting in Andriivka now. They weren't a couple of days ago. Ukraine is admitting they weren't in Andriivka, but it is perilously like vulnerable at the moment. So I expect Andriivka, I think, to go. I mean, the Russians still have a lot of artillery around here, and they're pummeling the Ukrainians a lot, and that means it's very very difficult, for example, to move through Klishchiivka. They are moving through Klishchiivka, but they are getting hammered as well by from the air. So anyway, Hannah Malia saying the Russians are effectively blocked in here because the Ukrainian artillery has, fire control essentially over all of the. I mean, obviously they're going to have fire control and mortar control even. It's not just artillery. You can have artillery all the way back there, and it can eat. I say easily. That's 40. No, that's not so easily. But if you're going to move that to sort of there, you can have artillery just on the edge of Kramatorsk, and you can hammer anywhere in Bakhmut. The question is, where is the Russian artillery? Can they do the same sort of thing? Well, the Russian artillery appears to be aimed at the Ukrainian forces doing their offensive work. So while that is happening, the Ukrainians seem to be freely targeting the Russians inside Bakhmut and hemming them in. Apparently, it's very difficult for the Russians to move in the city of Bakhmut itself. Anyway, so that's what Hannah Malia is saying. Kenneth Gregg, let's just pop into what this Finnish soldier is saying, who is in Ukraine. He says, we start with the Robotna front, where we currently have an information blockade, so OPSEC, due to sensitive operations. In general, it's a two-way front. The Russians are trying with everything they have to push us out of Novoprokopivka. Just to remind you, I know I'm going to be flying all over the place because I wasn't expecting to do live on this, so not sorry. So here is Robotna, and that has been liberated by the Ukrainians. They're fighting between there and Novoprokopivka. There's different claims about whether there's fighting in Novoprokopivka or to the north, as the Ukraine is also trying to flank it from the east. So anyway, claim from Kenneth Gregg is the Russians are trying with everything they have to push us out of Novoprokopivka, which is the implication is they're in it. The Ukrainians are in there with elite troops mixed with mobilized ones. We fend off their attacks with the work of rolling up their trenches. Some Telegram channels announce successes for us, especially Russian channels. The fighting is turbulent, so we have to be patient until the general staff drops the fog of war. However, we can report successes east of Pryutne and southwest of Pavlivka. It's now become easier for our troops, as the Russians have been forced to take troops from these areas to deploy them to Novoprokopivka. Okay, so this is the idea that they are deploying reserves to this area because it's such a threat to the Russians that they're pulling them from maybe the Pryutne area. I don't know if that's the case, because I think they're under the Kosh here, and I don't think they'll pull troops from here. But this area between Pryutne and Uruzhaine, now the claims are that is fully flattened, and the Russians have now pulled out of there. That's the latest coming from there. I think I've got a source talking about that in a little while. But what's interesting as well is the talk about there's also talk about Volodny. Where is that? Where are you? You are somewhere. Yes. So there's talk about this settlement here to the south between Pryutne and Zavitnya Bezhenya that is under threat, and we'll come on to talk about that. But he's also talking about there's the gains around Shevchenko for the Ukrainians. They have had gains there previously. There is this natural barrier of a river that the Ukrainians had struggled to get over in a previous attack last year, and they've made gains back to that river now again. So that is some success for the Ukrainians. I think they're putting pressure on Novodonetsk as well as Novopokrovka over here, which Andrew Perpetua is saying is probably going to get taken in the coming days, and that's just holding out, but it's really vulnerable, being attacked from multiple directions. Anyway, I was trying to get over to Vuhledar, where the Ukrainians are also having some success south of Pavlivka. So I don't know whether this is probably all part of the Shevchenko success, but I don't know whether there is success coming in here behind Pavlivka too. We saw some footage, some drone footage of Ukrainians clearing out some houses in Pavlivka. So I think this could be an interesting place to watch. A lot of people, and I've said this, I know Thierry as well has in my threads has said that this is, I think, one of the should be one of the best places to attack. I think you can get behind Russian lines by attacking around Vuhledar and getting through, properly cutting off Volnovakha, although the railway isn't active through there anymore because it's too close to front line. Anyway, so that's what Kenneth Gregg has said about that area. So we'll close him down, not literally. Zaporizhia front. The armed forces of Ukraine advanced and entrenched themselves between the villages of Robotna and Verbove, knocking out Russian armed forces from a number of strongholds in the direction of the village of Verbove. It's all about Verbove today. Right, this is one of the sources I was talking to you about Pryutne and Staromilske. Between those two villages, there is that salient left over of a Russian stronghold, if you like. That apparently Russian forces are withdrawn from that pocket because of the threat of encirclement, according to Wargonzo. So that is coming from a Russian source. Sorry to flip everywhere, but yeah, going back to here, they pulled out there. This was higher ground that was able to be defended because there was a ravine from the north that stopped the Ukrainians coming from the north. They mined that heavily while they came in from the east and the west and have basically shut down this area now. And according to Wargonzo, the Russians have pulled out from there. Okay, this is no report. So I'll go through what no report says. He's got quite a few things to say. He says the Ukrainian soldier with the call sign Osman from the 24th Adar Battalion has a big update that Ukrainians are developing successful offensive operations towards Volodny, south of Staromilske. So that's what I was mentioning about Volodny. This is just to the south. There is Volodny. So I don't know. Towards can do quite a lot of heavy lifting as does the word near. Near and towards can often mean like quite a long way away from, just generally in that vague direction. But anyway, in Zaporizhia, there is progress with the release of one settlement, so the liberation of a settlement that might have been Robotne, but it could be another settlement. And the Ukrainians are advancing southeast of Pavlivka. That's what I was talking about, Shevchenko. So, yep, good stuff for the Ukrainians in a number of places. So let's now look through what Null report says of a number of different fronts. And again, I'm going to be flipping all over the place. Sorry, because I wasn't ready to do this. Right. So Vasilivka to Robotna, you've got, if you can see the map here, you've got the reservoir there. You've got Vasilivka that seems to be quite a bit of a stasis going on. There is heavy shelling from both sides, or medium shelling from both sides, I guess. But they seem to be fairly entrenched in those positions and finding it quite difficult to move. Map updated with Ukrainian gains of the last 2 weeks included Ukrainian wedging itself between Novoprokopivka and Verbove and reached the first complex of trench lines. The claims that they've actually got through those, or at least the tank trench. Fighting is happening east of Kopane and northwest of Novopokrovka. Okay, let's put that on the map. So going back to here, we have claims, and you'll see some more claims concerning Verbove soon. Activity east of Kopane. We've got activity around Novoprokopivka, and we've got activity around Novopokrovka as we are widening the salient, and the Ukrainians are pushing down the trench lines towards Verbove. And there are claims today that they are fighting on the outskirts of Verbove. If that is the case, then the trenches have definitely been breached. Okay, what other claims? Romanov calls the situation in and near Verbove very dangerous. That's from yesterday. General Staff claim there are successes near Verbove, and then in the Velika Novoselka area that we've already seen, the Ukrainians liberated 2 square kilometers northeast of Pryutne. That's now flattened off. As you can see there, Russians have retreated from the ledge that acted as a strategic defensive line, and Ukrainians have moved towards Volodne, as reported already. And then we come on to Kherson and Oleshki. And we'll come on to see some footage of this. No map changes, but the Ukrainians have raised the flag on the Dachas to the north of Oleshki in the Antonivsky Bridge area. There were already strong indications that the bridge had maintained, but it is now visually confirmed. Also, Andrew Perpetua was talking about, I'll show you this on the map. Sorry, again, flipping around. He was saying that there's now plenty of evidence to suggest that the Ukrainians are not with impunity. They are under a lot of pressure from Russian artillery here, but they are moving from this side of the bridge to that side, and basically they control all of this. The Ukrainians safely control all of that area. So rather than being kind of grey zone, this is Ukrainian controlled. Uh, that's kind of where I'm going with that. And preliminary info is that Ukrainians are moving towards Oleshki from the west. So that might be from Holopristan. I think personally that the Ukrainians were probably pushed out of Kozachi Lahiri here. But they've had some success in eliminating Russians on the islands around there. So anyway, that's no reports sources. Let's go to some other sources. Looks like the advanced units of the Ukrainian forces have crossed the first line or in the main defensive line in the area of Lvov. So Andrew Perpechin in his live stream said he was fairly confident, but he hasn't changed his map that the Ukrainians were in position this to the west of to the east, sorry, of the tank trench here. And he says that because the Russians are shelling them there. So he's fairly sure, although he's just being really conservative, but he would basically move his map to having Ukrainian control here. And then we're hearing that actually there's fighting in the outskirts of Lvov as well. And we'll come on to see that next. So Global War Monitor says Russian footage shows that Ukraine has made a good advancement to the next to Novoprokopivka. So it's to the east of that settlement, south of liberated Robotna. 1.9 kilometers from Novoprokopivka. Well, there's claims that they're fighting in it actually, and 2.2 square kilometers has been added to the liberated status. When the direct advance of our troops is now underway, the enemy no longer has a chance to consolidate the defense that was breached. So after a while, it turns out to be a breakthrough status. The enemy's forces are directly retreating. So Homeniuk being quite boyish about what the Ukrainians are doing in this area, they will be taking their losses, of course. And Defmon here says what looks like advances in the direction of Lvov by the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. So a pretty useful unit has got the Russian lines have been pushed back beyond the tank trench ditch towards the manned trench line here. And the Ukrainians have been fighting down this trench line here, I believe, towards this this confluence of trenches. And if they can do that and get to here, maybe they're already there. That's where you'll see fighting on the outskirts of Robotna. Of Lvov there. So then we have no reports saying quite recently heavy fighting is happening near Lvov. Both Russian and Ukrainian sources report. Initial reports suggest that the Ukrainians are entering the western outskirts of the settlement. Okay, so this is significant. Zaporizhia front, Getty armed forces of Ukraine have broken through the Russian defense line, conducting small assault operations, on the outskirts of the village of Lvov. So that's the kind of latest coming from the front line before I started doing the live. I won't go into this. Is a long thread that he says I'm not wholly sure of the accuracy of the claims, says Defmon, but this is a Ukrainian source saying the 108th Airborne Regiment of the Russian Armed Forces have been absolutely hammered. He says that they've had a load of them desert, 30 to 50 soldiers deserted. Then they lost in an attack on a column somewhere between 250 and 350 people, including officers. Of course, this could be well over exaggerated. So on and so forth. A really interesting bunch of claims about how a third to a half of this this unit has been decimated in one way or another. And what, although someone says I'm not too sure about the trustworthiness of this source lately, Defmon says I did think this. I did link the source and put a disclaimer in the tweet. However, there are a few interesting things. So this is what I wanted to come to. Why move the 76th in so soon after moving the 7th into the area? They were most likely the intended reserve. So what he's saying is that if these claims about I presume part of the 7th have been decimated in this area, I presume it's around here. You had the claims over the last few days that I reported that the 76th, which is the best airborne troops that the Russians have, the best reserves have been brought into the area. If they were brought into the area just after the 7th were brought into reserve, then maybe the 7th have been degraded in the way that is claimed here. Because why would you then suddenly, quite soon afterwards, bring in the 76th? And unless they had actually lost a huge number of people due to some really effective Ukrainian strikes and activity and desertions and whatnot. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that one in there. Another source, this is the flag being raised over the Dachas near the Antonivsky Bridge. So that is visual evidence that is under control of the Ukrainians. I was going to share that with you. I probably don't have time today because otherwise it'd go on too long. So I'll leave that one. Just another analysis of the defenses in this area to add on to what I said the other day, reading to you some other sources. Yeah, and that was that claim from Andrew Perpetua about the Ukrainians pushing the Russians back in the Liman Pershi area. Rather goes against what, say, Syriac Maps is saying, that the Russians are making advances there. Yeah, there are very strong Russian positions west and south of Robotna. Still, there is not a single proof about fast. Uh, how I'm not quite sure what you're saying there. So anyway, his update, I'm not quite sure, but he's saying that the if you go south of Robotna, so this is the last thing on the front line. I've flipped around everywhere. He's saying, and we've seen this on the Russian defensive line maps, that the Russians have some quite serious trenches to the north of Novoprokopivka. So if you're going to attack Novoprokopivka, it's going to really be happening from the east. So that's why you're seeing the Ukrainians push down south in this area, I presume, so that they can then flank Novoprokopivka rather than having to come from the north, where there's some serious trench lines there. Anyway, that's the frontline stuff. It was a bit mashed up. Apologies, but you get the idea. Thank you so much. I can't believe people are still here. Goodness me, it's 2,265 of you. Holy cow. Tim says, USA says hi. Jonathan, you're my main source for news. Keep it up. Thank you, Tim. Really appreciate your support, and glad to have you know meaning around the world. That there are people in different countries appreciating this. That means an awful lot. So thank you, Tim. Really appreciate that. Mitch, or a legend, come from my other channel. Mitch Mazarol from Canada. Thanks, JP, for the stream, and the rest of the team for showing up in big numbers. Absolutely, Mitch. Mitch is a total legend in his own underwear. This is true. Neil Gardner says, with public support for Ukraine waning in the US, it's time for Europe to step up collectively. Interesting point. You hear this an awful lot. I think so. If you look at the stats, Europe are stepping up. So when you look at, goodness me, where is this? The Kiel Institute. I've shown it to you previously. Anyway, when you look at the stats for American support for Ukraine, right? In real terms, America's way ahead of everyone else, right? So they've given a whole load of stuff, and that's true. And America's brilliant for that. But it's all how you slice and dice this. And I know some of you heard me say this many, many times. But if you equate the figures, if you calculate the figures of assistance in GDP, in terms of GDP as a percentage of GDP, so America has a massive GDP. They're super, super rich, like effectively, in really simplistic terms. The US is a super rich country, right? In the world, the richest in the world, arguably. So they have the ability to give more. So if you say, as a percentage of GDP, what did the US give? They end up being 12th on the list. And actually, there are 11 countries above the US that give more stuff relative to how kind of well off they are or how productive they are as a nation. So places like Poland, the Baltic states, probably Czechia, Netherlands, I think nations like that have actually given more to Ukraine as kind of the size of their population and the size of their economy is concerned. The US is often a much bigger country in terms of population, and they have a much bigger defense budget, and they have much more staff, and so they can give more. But you need to understand the nuance of these stats. And then we talked about previously about how actually a lot of the kit that they give, they put a monetary value on, but is literally free. So you might say we're giving $50 million of kit, and that kit is predominantly Bradleys that are sitting in a warehouse. It's like that's been paid for. US tax dollars have paid for that, and actually is due to be replaced. So actually, we needed to dispose of this. We were going to have to pay to dispose of this. So rather than pay to dispose of this, we're going to give it to Ukraine and say this stuff is worth $50 million. And then the US government, I think it's a mistake, goes to the US population and says we've given an aid package worth $50 million, whereas they should say we've given a bunch of stuff that we're not going to use and we're sitting around in warehouses worth $0, and we're not going to have to pay to dispose of it, and it was due to be replaced anyway. So that $50 million, it then gets equated in how much the US has given, and then gives people a false understanding of how much stuff the US has given. And I'm not decrying the US. The US are amazing in how they're supporting Ukraine. The Ukraine will be screwed without the US. But what I'm saying is it needs to be a nuanced understanding. But there is this issue, as Neil says, about waning support for Ukraine. And that's why it's so important. That's why I feel justified in doing what I do. As much as I'm obsessed myself, I think it's important to keep this at the top of people's agendas and in the public information space. Thank you for those gifting memberships still. That's really kind. And thank you, Neil, by the way. Lee Valance, great vids. Regards from Oz. Cheers, mate. Really appreciate that. I had good times in Australia in 1996, backpacking from, oh my goodness, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, uh, Adelaide, Alice Springs, cross country, four-wheel drive to Perth, four-wheel drive to Perth to Darwin, and then out of Australia. That was amazing. Good times. I was young and fit then, not old and decrepit and riddled with MS. But hey ho. Thanks though, Lee. Good on you, mate. Sean Lindsay, always a great support. Really appreciate your support, Sean, and your consistent viewership. Keep up the great work. Thanks, mate. Good times, good times. Thank you. Okay, right. Moving on now. Right. People saying there's no map. This whole time, has there been no map? Oh my goodness. Let me know if there's been no map. Uh, okay. That would be really weird. I'm pretty sure I've got a map. Oh, it's me. Oh, holy cack. I've done all this talking on this live and I've not been able to look at the fact that there's no map up. Oh my God. I'm mortified. I'm absolutely mortified. I'm the worst human being. Oh my God. I'm such a loser. All of that stuff I've just took. I could cry, everybody. I could absolutely cry. I'm so sorry, everyone. Anyway, that all happened on a map. Gee whiz. Right. Very quickly, bit of gains for the Russians up there, but actually the Ukrainians, I think, have gained. Bakhmut. Oh dear. Gains for the Ukrainians around Bakhmut to the south. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. Yeah, uh, the Ukrainians are putting the Russians uh, under fire control in Bakhmut with their artillery, and you can see that that's quite simple for them because it's not too far for them to hit Bakhmut. There you go, 15 kilometers back, and you can easily have artillery position behind Chaziv Yar on the way to Kramatorsk, so on and so forth. You have gains for the Ukrainians, as um, according to, I can't believe I've done that, Suryat Maps. So they have finally admitted that there are gains there. And Drivka, I think, is going to fall. That is, I think, very vulnerable at the moment. As I said, I'm just repeating myself. Do apologize. And then we have some small gains for the Russians around Sumy, there, New York area. And if we come to the south, we had around Shevchenko and Pavlivka. The Ukrainians, I think, are putting in some it's putting the Russians under some pressure there, and I think we might see some advances for the Russians there. I've long said that this could be an area that the Ukrainians could really take advantage of. And Shevchenko there, we have seen on Andrew Pepecha's map some gains up to this river line, which has previously acted as a natural barrier for the Ukrainians on an attack last year. But we'll see there. This is a salient that is now flattened off between Priyutne and Zavitya Bazhanya. And then as we come to Robotna area, we've got Verbove. The Ukrainians are being successful around Verbove, and apparently there's fighting on the outskirts there. Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. We have this activity here also to the east of Novoprokopivka, because to the north there are these trenches that are very difficult for the Ukrainians to overcome. So you're seeing these advances to the east of Novoprokopivka, and they are fighting towards there. That is that. I'm probably going to keep the rest of my information to do a not live one because I kept you for too long, and I just can't believe I've just done that. Anyway, just thank you to Sal Vodka again, who says, shout out to the troll. Lots of people talking about no maps. Oh dear, please share your map. Says Wallem, just tries to give me a super chat to say, please share your map. Come on, mate. No map from Matt. Oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed. And so on and so forth. Okay, let's now. I don't know if it's worth going through what I've already said about the map updates, other than Oleshki, the Antonivsky Bridge here, is the Dacha area to the north that the Ukrainians now have full control over, and they can go either side of that bridge coming down. And yeah, and that shows there's footage of them doing that. The Russians hitting them with artillery, but it does show that they have control over that area. So it's all going to be about Verbove and whether the Ukrainians can have success in Verbove today, moving through that town, which means that they'll be able to get behind the front lines, the defensive lines that are basically following this blue line here. That's a tank trench, but there are. Andrew Perpetua said that he hasn't changed his map, but he's pretty sure that the Ukrainians have control here between the tank line and the manned trench, and that we have fighting on the outskirts of Verbove there. And that's the main activity taking place there. I'm getting a sense that the Velika Novoselka sector over here is seeing starting to pick up as they were refitting around here, the Ukrainians, but now we're seeing some pickup in activity, and I think they're having some good success around the Priyutne area, but they don't seem to have gone much further south around the Zavitne Bazhania area. There is the river to contend with as it meanders its way to the south there. There is also claimed that there is activity around Marfapil as well. Andrew Perpetua was talking about that. So we had heard previously Droznyanka, there's possibly some attacks going on there. The Ukrainians might want to take the approach of kind of whack-a-mole. If we can attack in a number of places, it keeps the Russians on their toes, and they're trying to predict where we're going to attack, and they have to spread out their defenses too widely. But anyway, that's the situation there. Thank you so much. I'm going to go away and cry. The Bazaya Corn, love the show. Would be a lot better today if you looked at chat and saw that you aren't sharing your map. Morning from the US. Yes, you are quite correct. It's so difficult. Oh dear. And Jay, take the ear out of headphones when you play the video. Okay, I'll have a look into that. Nice to see you, Mug, but it's all I see. There's no map. Says Tunes nowadays. And thank you so much for your support here in trying to tell me I'm useless. No map from Louise and from Bart, super sticker. Thanks, Bart Kuhlemans. Really kind of you. Thanks everybody, and so sorry about that. I will really quickly whiz through, because I don't think I'm going to have a chance to do another video as I have you all here. I'm going to really quickly whiz through some of the other content. This will be a massive video, so apologies, not sorry for that. Matt, super sticker, really appreciate you, Matt. And we can't see the map, says Rabbit Raccoon Gaming. Map not mug. That's the new meme. Map not mug. Right. Okay. Really quickly, let's go through some military aid. And I'll get back to some of the super chats soon. So USAID announces 250 million in military aid for Ukraine. So that is something I've already talked about in terms of how you calculate that. But this includes HIMARS, javelins, HIMARS munitions, and so on and so forth, and AIM-9M missiles. Some people are saying that those are sidewinders. That's not the case. I think these are missiles that will be used for NASAMS air defense systems. But anyways, a good amount of equipment, including, I believe, ambulances, mine clearing equipment, anti-tank weapons, and a load of small arms ammunition too. Really good from the US. Thank you for that. Germany plans to train 10,000 Ukrainian servicemen by the end of this war, according to German government. I mean, that is absolutely brilliant. And you can add to that the 20,000 the UK government and allies helped to train last year, and the 20,000 they're hoping to train this year, as well as 1,000 Ukrainian Marines that were trained by the UK commandos. So that is fantastic. Really good news. Germany are really stepping up to the plate. If you think at the beginning of the war, they had the mickey taken out of them for providing 5,000 helmets, and now they are the second biggest provider of military equipment to you and aid in general to Ukraine. When you're working out how much countries in the EU are given to Ukraine, you have to add up what they give unilaterally, like on their own, and then you have to add up what proportion of the EU budget they are responsible for, and how much the EU are giving to Ukraine as an organization. So it turns out that Germany funds, say, 25% of the EU budget, so they will be giving 25% of what the EU give to Ukraine, and you have to add that on to what Germany give unilaterally to give the total of what Germany give to Ukraine. And so quite often people go, "Oh, the UK give give the second most to after the US. Actually, we don't, because when you add on what Germany do, they're through the EU, they're above us. And then France is one of those funny ones where you have to add on they fund about 25% of the EU, but it's trying to find out actually what they do give because they don't announce a lot of what they give. Anyway, talk about Germans. Their 155mm self-propelled gun, the Boxer, is currently being produced for Ukraine. The first units will be delivered in the first quarter of 2024. That sounds like a long time away, but do you know what? We're in autumn. We're pretty much in autumn now of 2023, so it's not far away. And it's like the F-16s; it won't be too far away. So Russia plans to produce 1,300 Shahed drones by the year end, according to the intelligence. Whether they can or not is a different question, but that's what they're hoping to do. And if they can, then that is a really big problem for Ukraine, because they're producing quite effective drones, cheap and cheerful. They are improving supposedly some of the plans of the Iranians for their Shahed drones and producing them indigenously, so they're not going to be restricted by the ability of Iran to get the components and the ability for them to transport them to Russia. So that is a worry, but it's whether their bite is as big as their bark. These are this is just what I wanted to show you, but the Beaver drones that are being used apparently so effectively now by the Ukrainians. Again, more example of indigenous manufacturing, which is so important for the sustainability of Ukraine's defense of their territory. A Ukrainian defense official tells me, says Howard Altman, that Ukraine has modified its Neptune anti-ship missiles to strike land targets, and that in the not too distant future they fly to Moscow and elsewhere in Russia. Wow! So Neptune anti-ship missiles are now going to be land surface to surface missiles, and with the intention of being able to hit Moscow. Whether that is just a bit of bragging to try and get Russia worried, I don't know, but that'd be significant. We are seeing drones hit Moscow. We haven't seen them use distance missiles like this because they don't have those missiles. We have given them cruise missiles and said you can't use them to hit places in Russia. Okay, so you need to make your own. I've been wondering whether allies are giving Ukraine components and designs and saying, okay, we're very publicly saying you can't have these missiles to shoot into Russia, or if we give them to you, you can't use them to shoot into missile and to shoot into Russia. At the same time as we announce that publicly so as not to annoy Russia too much, we're going to say, oh, by the way, here are the plans to make those. Here are the components to make those. Here's a metal to make those. Here are all the parts to make those missiles. Go and make them yourselves. And we don't mind if that happens. I don't know. That's my speculation. Don't quote me on that, but that would be really significant. As it says here, it might finally give the Ukrainians a means to hit highly selected high-value targets inside Russia, including the irreplaceable energy infrastructure assets, just as Russia did to Ukraine. And on the Russian front, there is another example of Russian equipment being transported by train. I trying to work out whether this is good equipment, decent equipment, fairly modern tanks. They're not the T-62s or T-64s, that's for sure. This could be, a bit of a concern for Ukraine. You often see these. They are going to be producing new tanks. The question is, A, how many of them are they producing? And B, how well upgraded are they? What kind of tech can they put on board? Are they struggling to get the components that give them good thermal optics? Are they basically sending tanks to the front line that are newly constructed but don't have that much capability on board, technologically speaking? So I don't know. There's lots of questions to do with that. I'm not trying to downplay the Russians and their equipment just because I'm pro-Ukrainian, but those are the questions I would like to have answered. Because I think it's important to know that. Right. Final couple of geopolitical bits, and then I'll let you get on with your day. Goodness me. To my fellow Americans, I love this from Senator Blumenthal here. To my fellow Americans, let me just say, you're getting your money's worth in Ukraine. The Russian military has been degraded by one half. It's been reduced in strength by 50% without a single loss of an American serviceman, with less than 3% of our military budget. That is quite a bargain in military terms. This kind of goes back to what Neil said earlier, which is, the rest of the world needs to step, or Europe needs to step up. I'd say they are stepping up in quite significant ways compared to what they were doing. But also, although the American public may have their support wane somewhat, I think a lot of that's to do with the messaging here. I think the messaging needs to be better from the US government for sure. Why is, there needs to be really clear communications as to why this is in the American interests. Okay. But also without losing a single American soldier in terms of, like, we're not talking about volunteers who've gone over there. They have degraded or been part of the support that has degraded the Russian military capability by 50% and for less than 3% of their military budget. That's just insanely good return on investment, considering that's what they spent gazillions on for the last 70 years trying to do. 70 years of crazy money, flying to the moon, all this kind of stuff, having a war in Afghanistan, proxy, the Cold War, all of that stuff, all of that money spent. And actually, this is the best return on investment that you can get in terms of reaching those goals. That's what Americans need to properly understand. Yeah. Right. Next to here, reporting on. There's a couple of reports on this. This is quite interesting here. Is all not well with China and Russia? So China has declared part of Russia as its territory on new official maps. China's state-owned standard map service has presented a set of geographic maps for 2023 on which, for the first time, part of Russia's territory is indicated as part of China. It is about the Bolshoi Ussuriski Island on the Amur River. According to a 2008 treaty between Russia and China, the island was divided between the two countries. The new official map of China marks a whole island as the easternmost point of the Chinese territory. The explanatory note emphasizes that, quote, the map is made in accordance with the national standards for drawing borders of China and other countries of the world. The official set of maps will be used in various media materials, including news, books, and promotional materials. The maps can also be used as basic reference information. I mean, this is so on and so forth. Really interesting nugget of news, this. As Slava Ukraini says, China's state-owned mapping service has released official geographic maps of 2023. Dispute over the control of the island has been going on between Russia and China since 1860. In 2004, Putin signed a document that transferred parts of the Bolshoi Ussuriski Island and even the entire Tarabarov Island to China. In total, China received 337 square kilometers of territory. This I think represents the asymmetry of China and Russia. I think Russia have really become a vassal state of China and will become that, certainly. The Vladivostok on the easternmost edge of Russia, they've given China access to that port, which China had always wanted anyway. They are having to do these things because they are beholden to China for support. Without China, Russia are screwed. And so that means China has just massive amounts of leverage over China. China has massive amounts of leverage over Russia. It's huge. There's even talk. Where did I see it? Is it below one of these? Yes. So the Chinese ambassador to the EU called the words about boundless friendship between China and Russia a rhetorical device. China's ambassador to the EU called the joint statement of friendship between Putin and Xi Jinping rhetoric. In other words, actually, are they really that friendly? Is it just, it was Charles de Gaulle, someone pointed this out yesterday, saying, nations don't have friends, they have interests. That, to me, I've just got shivers down my spine. Just that summed up my entire video that I did yesterday, my extra video, which is people, the US aren't world police. They're doing stuff like this because it's in their interest to do so. But you don't have friends around the world. You don't make moral decisions ostensibly. We think in terms of morality as individuals, but as nations, you think in terms of strategic interests. So Russia to China are just an interest, and it's useful for them to be friendly with them. But they call this a statement of friendship. They say it's boundless friendship. But in reality, you're useful to me as long as you are useful to me. And when you're not useful to me, you're not useful to me. Obviously, but we're not friends. You're just an interest. And I think that's pretty spot on. Right, Tim White here says this is more good news, and this is my last bit of news. More good news, and the sort of detail and depth allies need to go into if they're to stop the illegal flow of parts and components to Russia. for its weapons program. Well done, Germany. So what is this? Germany arrests Russian Voldemar Weyrich, the CEO of Vicom Components GmbH, for exporting components used in Russia's Orlan-10 drones, using fronts in Dubai and Lithuania to hide the crimes. Wow, Germany does not list the company or last name, but I've identified both. This is significant, and this is exactly the sort of thing that needs to happen, so that there aren't these loopholes that are found that enable the West and otherwise allied nations to have their corporations still export components to Russia, such that they can make weaponry to succeed in the war. So I think that is really, really significant news there. And I'm going to go back to the live chat to um, just further see my embarrassment. So, Paul Gilbert, please show your screen. John, love your face, but the map is really useful. Oh, and James Myers, thank you for the super sticker, James. Really, really appreciate it. You're all being really kind today. Thank you so much. For the past 30 minutes, there's no map, just you on the screen, says Sean Lindsay. Of this, I'm now aware, Sean, but I also thank you for your patience. Your whole update was for the cats, no maps. Oh, yeah, but we got there in the end, and I think I'm just going to go and sit in a cold, dark room for the rest of the day and cry myself into a corner. Um, uh, start over with the map, please. Um, anyway, Mark Bizq, I've got it right. Thank you, Mark. He's really, really generous. He understands my pain. Thank you, thank you. I can't believe the generosity of you guys today. Now, so basically, the live has finished. I don't know if you want me to just to do the addendum of showing you the frontline stuff with just go through the front line again. It will just be going over what I've already done and said. Because actually, Lahiri and Kherson, Ukraine has raised the flag. Absolutely best live stream ever. Thanks, Luis. Or the worst, I'm not sure. The most embarrassing, that's for sure. But thank you, and thank you to Gary as well, Gary Rollinson, who's such a strong supporter of the channel. Really appreciate that. Anyway, yes. So that's the end of the live stream as far as all that is concerned. I don't know that I have much more that can be said about the front line. I've said it all, but you just didn't see the map. I really, really, really apologize. Next time I do a live, but I'm going to go, as someone says, go and spend time with your family. I think I will. Appreciate that. Anyway, thank you so much for your support and a huge support. Goodness me, today, honestly, I am honoured to have you guys as a community. Please check out the Discord, which should be linked. If it's not linked in the description below, I'll go and shove a link in after this. There's a Discord server where people are already really actively discussing stuff. I will drop into it as I can. I won't be there like too much because my time is really, really short. Yeah, so please check that out. I might do another live this week because I think it is a useful way of me spreading all of this information. Actually, rather than doing two videos, I can do a live, but I'll see how it goes. And I will remember not to just have my face on the screen. Please forgive me, everybody. Please do. Anyway, thank you so much for your massive support. All the very best, and apologies again. Take care.